Ghosts. Denied the comfort of the afterlife, these souls are cursed to wander the material world. They are lost. Often trapped in one spot, ghosts cast about, seeking a relief that may never come. Sometimes they warn us of danger or appear to foretell the death of a loved one, or even our own death. Because they are remnants of us. Ghosts are the most frightening and ethereal monsters among us.
A huge thank you to today's video sponsor. It seems that all of us these days struggle with personal productivity, healthy habits, and self-discipline in order to make the most of our day, to achieve our best possible work-life balance. The Fabulous app is here to help. Fabulous can be 100% personalized, and you can either choose your own step-by-step path to building better habits, or you can take multiple guided journeys. The choice is yours. Habit changing and habit building is hard. Fabulous truly makes it easy. What we love is that unlike other self-development apps, Fabulous lets you change and build habits at your own pace. The first 100 people who click the link in the description will get 25% off their yearly premium subscription to Fabulous. If you unlock Fabulous Premium, you can take immediate advantage of unlimited habits, journeys, and exercises, along with daily coaching sessions and the ability to save your progress as you grow to your best self. Who doesn't want to be a better you? Go ahead and click on the link in the description today.
How long have ghosts haunted us? While records are few, legends are many. One of the earliest tales takes us to ancient Egypt and the rule of a pharaoh cursed for his heresy towards the old gods. It is 1352, and Amenhotep IV has inherited the powerful and wealthy kingdom from his father. He views religion differently than his sire. Amenhotep IV carries his father's interest in the sun god Aten further, in a move that disempowers the priests of Egypt and creates a monotheistic nation. Amenhotep IV renames himself Akhenaten for living spirit of the Aten, and outlaws the worship of all gods, particularly Amun-Re, the long-standing king of the gods. Akhenaten orders the construction of a new capital city, Amarna, in Aten's honor. He forces a mass exodus of 20,000 people to travel 200 miles from the former capital of Thebes. In 1340, at a celebration to honor Aten, Akhenaten is about to experience the wrath of the gods. During the festivities, his wife, Nefertiti, dies. Then an elder queen, and finally, one of Akhenaten's 6 daughters follow. In retaliation, he has his soldiers strike Amun-Re's name from temple walls and records. By the time Akhenaten dies in 1336, Egypt is on the verge of social and political collapse. His once loyal followers rush back to Thebes and leave Amarna empty. But Amun-Re is about to prove his power as he curses the pharaoh to wander his former kingdom for all time. And it is said that the ghost of disgraced pharaoh Akhenaten still haunts the sands of Egypt. One of the earliest recorded ghost stories comes from the days of the Roman Empire, as Pliny the Younger, in 1st century AD, tells of a haunted villa in Athens. Lodgers are continually frightened away by the specter of an old man. Emaciated and with a long beard and hair, he rattles chains on his feet, terrifying all who see him. And so it comes that the philosopher Athenodorus decides to lodge at this now abandoned house, curious of the truth behind this phantom. As he leans over his work that night, he hears a rattle of the chains. Athenodorus stays focused on his work and signals to the ghost to not disturb him. Yet the ghost rattles his chains over Athenodorus's head and beckons once more. The philosopher takes his lamp and follows. The ghost, dragged by his own chains, walks to the courtyard and disappears. Athenodorus marks the spot with a pile of leaves and twigs and, the next day, has the magistrate dig. They discover something chilling, a long-buried skeleton wrapped in chains. The corpse is given a proper burial, and the house is haunted no more. An early significant tome on the specters, shades, and remnants of the dead is written by Swiss theologian Ludwig Lavater in 1569. This work, translated in full, is titled "Of Ghosts and Spirits Walking by Night, and of Strange Noises, Cracks, and Sundry Forewarnings, which commonly happen before the death of men, great slaughters, and alterations of kingdoms." It documents hauntings and spirits from medieval times, something that has a presence in the work of our next writer, who uses spirits to great effect in his plays. His name is William Shakespeare. His works immortalized on stage and in the hearts of the world, William Shakespeare uses both fantasy and the supernatural to define the characters in his plays. He makes two major contributions to the world of ghosts and phantoms with both Macbeth and Hamlet. Born in April of 1564, William Shakespeare is well established as managing partner of the Lord Chamberlain's Men by the 1590s. His plays are admired by theatergoers throughout England, thanks in part to his ability to appeal to all levels through his wide spectrum of characters. Where his earlier plays are historical and comic, he establishes himself as master of the tragedy with plays such as Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, and Othello. Generals Macbeth and Banquo encounter three witches who predict Macbeth's rise to the throne. First, the power-hungry Macbeth and his wife murder the good King Duncan to position himself as the new king of Scotland. Then they have Banquo killed as a precaution. Banquo, however, won't stay dead. His ghost returns to take Macbeth's seat at the banquet table. Was Banquo intended to be a real ghost or a figment of Macbeth's guilt-ridden imagination? The most chilling of Shakespeare's ghosts appears to more than one character. In Hamlet, the Danish prince's father is murdered by his mother and appears after death to two royal guards. It is when his son waits for him one night that he finally meets the specter. The ghost returns to exact revenge against his murderous brother Claudius and sets the play in motion. Both Banquo and Hamlet's ghosts are used for narrative effect in a larger story, a psychological effect that gives an eeriness to Shakespeare's work. Something grounded in the reality of psychology, yet also otherworldly. While the ghost takes root in Europe and the rest of the world, the young country of the United States of America, ravaged by a revolutionary war against the British, becomes a haven for the wandering specters of the dead. As the war reaches its bloody conclusion by 1783, British ships still in Boston Harbor are fired upon by Americans. Newlyweds William and Mary Burton are on a ship that is bombarded. Mortally wounded by a cannonball hit, the dying Mary makes William promise to bury her on land. The heartbroken William is allowed to land on Long Island with the remains of his wife sewn into her favorite red blanket. she is quickly buried in the dunes with nothing more than a piece of driftwood as a marker. William pays his last respects in a strange land and vows to return and carry her back to England. For some unknown reason, he never does. Nearly 20 years later, in 1804, a small group of fishermen wreck on the island at night. As they gather their bearings, a wailing sound comes forth on the wind. A figure in a red cloak materializes and drifts towards them. As she nears, they notice blood gushing forth from her head wound. She disappears over a hill and leaves a chill in her wake. In 1891, a soldier at the newly constructed Fort Strong also encounters the ghost of Mary Burton, her macabre appearance shaking him to the core. Like the Revolutionary War, the Civil War also creates its own share of ghosts. February 20th, 1864, marks the Battle of Olustee, where Federal and Confederate armies clash in Olustee, Florida. It is the only major Civil War battle in the state. Private John Rowley shoots Private Jerome Dupuy, both of the 7th Connecticut Infantry, in the back of the head, killing him. Accidents such as these are common on the battlefields of the Civil War, and it is assumed by the company's commander, Captain Benjamin Skinner, that this is just the case. But the scuttlebutt circulating amongst the soldiers tells a different story, that Dupuy was murdered as a result of his own private war with Rowley. It is so widespread that Rowley is arrested on suspicion. Rowley, haggard and tired, does not sleep in his cell. Finally, he calls the guard over. He is ready to confess to the intentional murder of Dupuy. Before the Battle of Olustee, the two men had fought, with it ending with Dupuy cutting Rowley with his knife. Rowley would not let it go and murdered Dupuy on the field in vengeance. He thought their feud was settled then and there amongst the other dead of Olustee. He was wrong. Rowley's statement, as published in the Danbury Jeffersonian, May 1864.
I swore if I ever got a chance, I'd kill him. I had one at Olustee and I killed him. Nor is he the only man I have killed or caused to die. I cut out the entrails of a sailor on the gunboat since the war began. And I killed by stabbing a man in New York, which caused me to leave my family and go as a substitute for a draft man last fall. But the ghost of Dupuy is the only one that ever troubled me. Since the battle, I have dreaded nights, for they are horrible nights. When on picket duty, I always see Dupuy standing a little ways in front, his face full of blood and the bullet hole in his forehead. At night, in my dreams, he stands at the entrance. I awake. He is there, pale and bloody, but vanishes as soon as I see him. I could not keep this horrible crime a secret any longer.
Dupuy is hanged on September 3rd, 1864, in Petersburg, Virginia. Rowley is never seen or heard from again. The most famous ghost story from America's early days is the Bell Witch. This real-life haunting has grown into a legend that even encompasses an American president. It is 1817 when John Bell, a successful Tennessee farmer, encounters an odd animal in his fields. It has a dog's body with a rabbit's head. He fires on it, and it disappears. That night, the true terror begins. At first, there are knocking sounds on the outside of the house, but it soon changes into a gnawing, as if it were from a rat on the children's bedposts. It is followed by even more disturbing noises, as of someone gagging, that last until about 1 a.m. Then, the noise of chains dragging and rocks falling on the floor. And things become suddenly violent. One of the Bell's son's hair is twisted and pulled so hard it yanks him up from the bed. It then spares him and starts on teenage daughter Betsy. The Bell Witch will target her from that night forward and make her the subject of its myriad cruelties. A neighbor, James Johnston, witnesses the trouble during an overnight stay and urges Mr. Bell to seek help. Then, the entity begins speaking.
I am a spirit. I was once very happy, but have been disturbed.
The witch, as they call her, gains the name Kate. She offers predictions and advice to any who will ask her. One such visitor is Andrew Jackson in 1819, just years after his victory in the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812. As the wagon bearing Jackson heads towards the Bell farm, the horses strain to go further. Jackson calls out that it must be the witch, and the witch responds. She will let them proceed and promises to see them later that night. Jackson's men are pensive as they wait for Kate to show herself. One pulls his gun and claims to have it loaded with a silver bullet made to destroy any evil spirit. He is flung about in the air, kicked by an unseen force, and pushed out the door. Jackson insists on staying. What happens, and whether Jackson's visit actually had happened at all, is unknown. The family continues to fall apart. Betsy is later forced to break off her engagement to a young man Kate disapproves of, as the witch taunts them wherever they go. John Bell does not fare as well. He begins experiencing twitching in his facial muscles and has trouble swallowing. This becomes seizures that leave him bedridden. Kate vows to let old Jack Bell die. On December 20th, 1820, John Bell breathes his last. A vial of liquid is found and tested on the family cat, who instantly falls dead. Kate's voice emanates as she takes credit for murdering John Bell. The Bell Witch has won. Was the Bell Witch real? And if so, how much of the story was actually true? We may never know. In 1860, First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln holds seances in the White House in the hopes of reaching her dead sons. Through the use of a psychic medium, a seance is a method of reaching the ghosts flitting throughout the material world. On April 14th, 1865, John Wilkes Booth fires a .44 caliber shot into the back of the president's head. At 7:22 the next morning, Abraham Lincoln dies. Mere days before, the president foresaw his own death in a dream. But that is not the end for President Lincoln. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, having just taken an evening bath and with nothing more than a cigar and glass of scotch on his entire person, he sees Lincoln's specter leaning on the bedroom fireplace. They look at one another, and the president disappears. There are more reports over the decades, primarily in the Lincoln bedroom, of footsteps and a rapping on the door. Perhaps it's the president's own refusal to go away, as quoted by him while an Illinois lawyer, where Lincoln has a premonition of his death.
There seemed to be a death-like stillness about me. Then I heard subdued sobs as if a number of people were weeping. I thought I left my bed and wandered downstairs. There the silence was broken by the same pitiful sobbing, but the mourners were invisible. I went from room to room. No living person was in sight. The same mournful sounds of distress met me as I passed along. It was light in all the rooms. Every object was familiar to me. But where were all the people who were grieving as if their hearts would break? I was puzzled and alarmed. What could be the meaning of all this? Determined to find the cause of a state of things so mysterious and so shocking, I kept on until I arrived at the east room, which I entered. There I met with a sickening surprise. Before me was a catafalque, on which rested a corpse, wrapped in funeral vestments. Around it were stationed soldiers who were acting as guards, and there was a throng of people, some gazing mournfully upon the corpse, whose face was covered, others weeping pitifully. "Who is dead in the White House?" I demanded of one of the soldiers. "The president," was his answer. "He was killed by an assassin." Then came a loud burst of grief from the crowd, which awoke me from my dream.
Poet Percy Bysshe Shelley foresees his own in 1822. Shelley, his wife Mary, and some friends are staying at a beach house. One day, on the terrace, Shelley sees his doppelganger, an exact double. It asks, "How long do you mean to be content?" Shelley's friend, Jane Williams, sees Percy walk past the terrace window twice, mere seconds apart. At the time, Percy Bysshe Shelley is on a walk some distance away. Before leaving to ride, on his new boat, Ariel, Shelley leaves one written line, unfinished, on his desk. "Then, what is life?" I cried. The Ariel is caught in a storm, and the bodies of Shelley and his friend Edward Williams wash ashore. They are buried on the beach of Livorno, Italy, but soon dug up and cremated on the beach in a ceremony overseen by Lord Byron, John Trelawney, and Leigh Hunt. Percy's heart refuses to burn. Preserving it in wine, Mary Shelley keeps it in her desk, where it stays until her own death. Another member of the Lake Geneva party makes his own spectral appearance. On November 25, 1865, William Rossetti holds a séance where he contacts the spirit of his uncle, John Polidori, writer of The Vampire. William apparently gets the truth behind Polidori's death.
I had made contact with my uncle and asked how it was that he truly died. He replied he had killed himself. As our conversation continued, I went on to ask if he was happy. He replied, "Not exactly."
The headless horseman figure rides through folklore as far back as the Green Knight from the Arthurian legend, named after the nation's father. The story is the legend of Sleepy Hollow. The writer is Washington Irving. Washington Irving is born in New York City on April 3, 1783. The American Revolution has just ended, and his parents name him after the war's greatest hero, George Washington. Irving's pursuit of a law degree results in his barely passing the bar in 1806, yet he finds more success with his humorous essays. In 1809, he publishes the satirical A History of New York under the pen name of Diedrich Knickerbocker. Within his anthology book, The Sketchbook, under the nom de guerre of Geoffrey Crayon, is a short story that makes a name for Irving. It introduces a fearful specter that becomes a staple in American folklore. It's the legend of Sleepy Hollow. A schoolteacher named Ichabod Crane learns of the apparent ghost of his upstate New York village. Then, one night, Ichabod Crane encounters the Headless Horseman. Did Crane encounter the true Headless Horseman, or was it all a ruse by a rival suitor? Crane disappears, only his hat and a shattered pumpkin left in his place. Washington Irving manages to introduce an iconic, terrifying vision into the American ghost story.
As a kid, I always loved the Washington Irving story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Going into being a teenager, we actually moved to Sleepy Hollow Lane in California, not the one in New York. And we had a giant stained glass of the Horseman in the front of our house, which was an amazing figure. You know, this giant black horse with red eyes, and this headless rider on top, rearing up with the moon in the background and the trees, and it's just synonymous with Halloween and you know, walking alone at night and the sort of urban legends and stories and campfire tales that abound at that time of year. One of the things that I always liked about the Headless Horseman, especially like in the cartoons and how he's depicted in films, is the character of Ichabod Crane as a big geek, you know, because I felt like I was a big geek. And, you know, this sort of awkward, too tall, eats a lot, but somehow, really, you know, book smart. And I think that there weren't a lot of characters in stories, in adventure stories that sort of fit that description. In a certain cartoon, when I was a kid, the character of Ichabod Crane was I thought was sort of romanticized. Looking back on it now, Ichabod's kind of a jerk. And really, Brom Bones, even though I saw him as a big bully, the story kind of favors Brom Bones a bit, to where you kind of realize that this is like a Popeye cartoon in which Bluto finally wins, you know, where he doesn't like the fact that they both like the same girl. He dresses up as the Horseman, and he scares the living daylights out of this poor geek and runs him out of town. But what's funny is, like I said, as a kid, I really sort of saw it as Ichabod being very sympathetic. But the way he's portrayed in the Disney film is actually kind of not very flattering. He's really kind of, this is not a Revenge of the Nerds kind of story. This is just kind of, you know, we're really not supposed to like him that much, so it's okay that the Headless Horseman scares the daylights out of him, you know, and the big broad-shouldered jock wins the day, you know. It's actually kind of disgusting.
But what of the English ghost story? Author Charles Dickens pens an immortal tale that transcends being a holiday tradition and becomes legend the world over. Born in 1812, Dickens' family is plunged into poverty in the 1820s when his father is imprisoned for debt, forcing Charles to work in a blacking factory at age 12. Despite his dark beginnings, Charles grows to become a journalist and, from there, one of history's greatest literary figures. Dickens is inspired by Irving's own writing about the Christmas holiday in The Sketchbook. According to the author,
I do not go to bed 2 nights out of 7 without taking Washington Irving under my arm upstairs to bed with me.
Dickens starts his ultimate tale about Christmas and the spirit of man in September 1843 and finishes it a mere 6 weeks later. This immortal work follows the transformation of a miser, Ebenezer Scrooge, after he is visited by 4 ghosts, the first of whom he knew in life.
The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail, and his coat skirts and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped around his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind.
The 3 ghosts that follow, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, use their supernatural influence to show Scrooge the error of his ways and what awaits him in death. A Christmas Carol is published on December 19th and sells out of the 6,000 copy print run by Christmas Eve. Just years prior to Dickens writing A Christmas Carol, one of his friends and contemporaries experiences a real-life spectral encounter. An accomplished British Royal Navy officer, Captain Frederick Marryat, had been writing tales based on his nautical experiences. Once, when docked, he received a visit from his brother, who had come to report his own death. But his next spectral encounter is far more chilling. In 1836, friends of Marryat's are told by guests that their house is haunted by a woman in a brown dress, the same one painted in an old portrait. The specter is first sighted the year before, during Christmas. Marryat promises to stay in the haunted chamber, hoping to discover the truth. On the 3rd night of his stay, Marryat accompanies 2 of the baronet's nephews. He almost forgets to bring his pistol with him, in case they sight the brown lady. As the trio walk down the darkened halls, someone carrying a lamp approaches. Modest, from being just in shirt sleeves and slacks, Marryat has them drop back behind the door. He sees something he never bargains for: the brown lady. The bullets pass through. The brown lady is undoubtedly real. But who was she? Legend points to a lady, Dorothy Walpole, who was married to Charles Townshend at Raynham. When Townshend found out she'd been having an affair, he angrily keeps her locked in her rooms until her death in 1726 by smallpox. She is sighted again in 1926, and then in 1936.
In the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a great spiritualist movement both in the British Isles and in the United States. It included a lot of seances and mediums talking to ghosts, and it was very common for people to fake ghost photographs. If you really want to see a ghost, you'll see one everywhere. So some of these things, as bad as they look to us, especially modern eye, that's used to seeing and processing images like that, then we know they're fake, but a lot of people didn't. Well, the thing about the brown lady photograph is it really looks very, very convincing. The actual photograph of the brown lady was taken in September, but it was published in England in a magazine called Country Life, which was very popular, but mostly it was a look at these manor houses, but there was a lot of other content, including fictional content. And it appeared in the December 26th issue, 1936. This is traditionally the time around Christmas that ghost stories are most popular in the British Isles. So it was really, really good timing. But what happened next was it got sold to Life magazine for a republishing in the January 4 issue, which was 1937. It had a big picture of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he was getting ready to run for his second term. And that was the biggest news in the country. So they had a subscription rate around 600,000, I think, at that time, which meant that many people who were getting the magazine or just sitting in barbershops were going to read that because they wanted to see what was going on. And so at least hundreds of thousands, and maybe even over time millions of Americans saw that picture. And at the time, it was probably as convincing a ghost picture that had ever been made.
The Brown Lady was also seen in the 1960s, but apparently not since. But that doesn't mean she does not still haunt Raynham Hall.
Whether or not Poe believed in spiritualism, whether or not he was ridiculing spiritualism, he helped popularize it. And he became intimately associated with the movement at an early date. Poe extended also to the pseudosciences of the day, including phrenology, which was the belief that people's behavior influenced the shape of their skull. Therefore, you could tell something about someone's character based on the shape of their skull. And there's also another science where science and mysticism met. It was mesmerism. And Franz Mesmer had developed this theory that all matter was connected by magnetic forces. So he developed animal magnetism and tried to exploit those forces to put people into trances so they could read their mind or heal their bodies or even control their minds. And people in Poe's time had developed mesmerism for stage shows. There's a fellow, Andrew Jackson Davis, who would go on stage and go into a mesmeric trance in order to communicate with the spirits of the dead. And he famously predicted that in 1848 an upheaval would take place that would change the world as we knew it. And of course in 1848, that was when the Fox sisters in New York started hearing rapping noises, and they said it was the spirits of the dead communicating with them. And eventually they went on stage and gave seances communicating with the dead. This was the birth of the modern spiritualist movement. There was also an influence of Swedenborg, who believed in communication with spirits from other worlds. So Poe couldn't just ignore this. He had to write about this. He wrote stories like Mesmeric Revelation and The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar. And in The Facts of the Case of M. Valdemar, Poe portrayed his story as if it were a news article. He had just recently convinced the city of New York that someone had crossed the ocean in a hot air balloon. Everybody rushed out and bought the New York Sun to learn all about it until they figured out he'd made the whole thing up. But with The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, there's a group of scientists who are tasked with mesmerizing a man just at the moment of death to keep his mind alive after his body was dead. This way they could communicate with him after his death, and an ethereal voice would answer them from the other side. And after they kept this man in his mesmeric state for several weeks, he finally asked them to just let him die. And they woke him up from a trance, and he dissolved into a pool of goo before their very eyes. The story is so realistic that it was thought to be true, and is reprinted in a medical journal in England. It was reprinted as a separate pamphlet in England, where the introduction says that everyone in America believes this is true, so it must be true. And the spiritualists also believe people were writing Poe letters. And even after he told everyone it was a hoax, they kept writing him saying it really was true, wasn't it? This wasn't really a hoax. And one fellow even wrote to him, said that he's attempted a similar experiment with a man who'd passed out drunk, and he was able to revive him using mesmerism.
Another British haunting, this one fictitious and far more humorous, comes from the author Oscar Wilde. Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde is an Irish writer born in 1854. Known for his involvement in the aestheticism movement, as well as his rapier wit, Wilde writes only one novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, in 1890, about a young man whose portrait changes to reflect his own vices. While writing the short story The Canterville Ghost in 1896, to be published in 1897, Wilde's play, The Importance of Being Earnest, is still a raging success on the British stage. The Canterville Ghost follows the failed hauntings of a medieval English ghost when faced with an American family.
My dear sir, I really must insist on you oiling those chains. I brought you for that purpose a bottle of Tamasee Rising Sun lubricator. It is said to be completely efficacious upon one application, and there are several testimonials to that effect on the wrapper from some of our most eminent native divines. I shall leave it here for you by the bed candles, and will be happy to supply you with more, should you require it.
Yes, his ghost story, if you can call it that, the Canterville Ghost, I think one of the things that makes it so lovely and so readable and so funny is that he brings there the trappings of the Gothic, the chains jangling in the closet at night, the mysterious haunted house, brings it up, bang up against modern materialism, embodied in the form of a family of Americans. Wilde was deeply enamored of America. As you probably know, he spent a whole year here when he was a young man, lecturing, doing a series of lectures on art, on traditions in art and the importance of art in the home, a series of lectures around the country, but more importantly than those lectures, on beautifying America and beautifying American homes. He was just performing the role of Oscar Wilde, being himself, playing it up to the hilt, dressed up to the hilt, and he became really one of the very first modern celebrities. There was a huge media circus following him through this through America for an entire year. But of course he was hugely warmly embraced in the course of this year, and he found America to be a much more liberated, open-minded society. People, particularly women, much more in control of their own destinies. He always admired its modernity and its liberality, and I think maybe even created in his own mind the idea that America was a kind of paradise. The Canterville Ghost, it's a very, very funny story. The American ambassador and his family, who are resident in the UK, but they're complete materialists. They believe there's a rational, material explanation for everything. If there are bloodstains on the carpet, let's get stain remover to remove them. They don't worry where those bloodstains have come from. And of course, as I say, this complete collision between modern American rationality and consumerism on the one hand, and old British antiquated Gothic traditions on the other.
One person who was unable to contact a loved one beyond the grave is Harry Houdini. Grieving for the loss of his mother in 1920, the world-famous magician and escape artist contacts several mediums in the hope of talking with her again. Instead, he finds many of them to be charlatans and frauds, and makes a second career of exposing them. Houdini goes so far as to attend seances in disguise in his vendetta against mediums. Houdini's mission even cost him the friendship of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, writer of Sherlock Holmes, and himself a believer in spiritualism. When Harry Houdini dies in 1926, he leaves his wife to fulfill a promise to him, to try and reach him through a medium with secret signal words known only to them as the evidence that she would need. For 10 years, Bess Houdini holds a Houdini seance every Halloween night, finally giving up in 1936.
There was a lady, Sarah Helen Whitman, a poet in Providence, Rhode Island. And after Poe's wife's death, she heard about Poe's mesmeric experiences, and she was very interested in Poe. She'd read about him, she'd read his poetry, she wanted to meet him. And today, if you're meeting some of you, you might look them up online, you might Google them, but she wrote letters to people that Poe knew. She wrote letters to ladies who were associated with him, and one of them wrote back to her that Poe had great mesmeric experiences, and he knew great many uncanny things. So definitely Sarah Helen Whitman had to meet him, had to learn about his mesmeric experiences. So when Poe met this great spiritualist, they first met because she'd sent him fan mail. She'd addressed a poem to him, to Edgar Poe, a Valentine's poem, in which she said she wanted to fly away with the raven to his nest up in the sky. So naturally, when he met her, they took a long walk through a cemetery together, and he proposed to her among the tombstones. But her mother threatened to disinherit her, cut off without a cent if she married Poe, so she had to turn him down. He was so distraught that he attempted suicide by overdosing on laudanum. But he recovered, and 10 days later, she agreed to marry him on the condition that if you ever touch alcohol again, the wedding's off. So their engagement lasted 1 month. And she cut it off. She said she could never see him again. And a year later, he dies. At this point, she said that she heard knockings in her room. Whenever she would ask a mental question, she would hear these strange noises in the room, and she thought it was Poe's spirit trying to communicate with her. So she hired a medium to move into her house with her for 6 months to help her communicate with Poe's spirit. After that, she became a medium herself and held several seances trying to communicate with Poe, trying to find out what kind of messages he had for her from the beyond. And only a few months after his death, some of his acquaintances in New York, including Horace Greeley, a newspaper editor, and Rufus W. Griswold, Poe's literary executor and editor, held a seance. And they brought in the Fox sisters who'd given birth to the movement. And it's tempting to think they might have helped try to communicate with Poe's spirit on Griswold's behalf. But exactly what they spoke about that seance isn't known, but Greeley and Griswold came away as unbelievers, although Griswold apparently did develop a crush on one of the Fox sisters, and he took her autograph album and wouldn't give it back until one of her friends wrote to him asking him to please kindly return the autograph album.
In Chicago, Illinois, in 1939, Jerry Pallas meets a girl at the Liberty Grove Dance Hall. They dance and even kiss. When Jerry offers to drive her home, chances are he wasn't expecting what happened next. Driving along Archer Avenue, she has him stop in front of Resurrection Cemetery, where she quickly exits, telling him that he can't follow her where she has to go. The girl disappears while darting to the cemetery gates. Her name is Resurrection Mary, and she is believed to be the ghost of Anna Maria Norkus, who was killed in an auto accident in 1927. She was only 12 years old. Resurrection Mary could also have been Marie Bergovi, 21, who died in an auto accident in 1934. No one knows for sure. Another legend is that she had been walking home after a fight with her boyfriend at a local dance hall when she's killed by hit and run. Whoever she was in life, Resurrection Mary is Chicago's most famous ghost, with several sightings of her recorded over the decades. Bob Main, a manager at Harlow's nightclub, sees her twice at the club, next to the dance floor, pirouetting by herself. When people try to talk to Mary, she shakes her head and seemingly looks through everyone. In 1979, cab driver Ralph spots this lone girl standing outside of a local shopping center on a cold night. Mary lets herself into the passenger seat, and as Ralph asks if she's okay, she only replies, "The snow came early this year," and gazes outside the window at the fallen snow. She yells for him to stop, and when he brakes, points across Ralph to a small shack across from Resurrection Cemetery, and disappears. The car door never opens. Sightings of Resurrection Mary continue throughout the 1970s and 80s. Once, she appears trapped in the cemetery. Drivers drive right through her, standing in the middle of the road, and some even hit her. But her body disappears shortly after, leaving an imprint where she had lain across the road. what happens to us when we die? The presence of ghosts in our world remind us what an unknown the afterlife truly is to we mortals. So be sure to keep your ears peeled for a creak, or a groan, or if you see a luminescence coming down the hallway. Run and hope that if it does catch up to you, it isn't vengeful. And be assured that as horrific as the spirits of the dead are, the demons that we will meet next are the most dangerous of the monsters among us.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.